Now, Freud. Let's remember that Kant did anatomy of the subject, and our structure, our logical structure, time, space, the structure of the subject to know the world, right? So there's an experience in the nature, and we use our subject structure with the elements of time, space to understand this. Hegel came and said, look, there's also an experience inside the subject, right? There's an experience inside the subject. And Schopenhauer will say, stop, Kant and Hegel. Both are talking on reason. Of course, the word is image, and more than image, the word is my representation, the will. So Schopenhauer will say, more than the reason, there's the will. But this will in Schopenhauer is something like empty. Nietzsche will say, this will is stronger than we think. It's a will of power. It's affirmative will. So the reason in the beginning of the modernity is the highest point. And in the end of modernity, with Schopenhauer and the transition in the initiation of contemporary philosophy with Nietzsche, the will is more than reason. And Freud came and started to do analysis of the mind and our psychological structure is more than consciousness, right? Before Freud, let's remember what Nietzsche said in his book for Further Than Good and Evil. I will translate because this book is in Portuguese. Nietzsche will say, think a thought came not when I want. So this subject is not the origin of the thought. The subject that is understood by a Kantian perspective, right? Freud will say, there are some phenomena in our lives that show to us that there is something more than the consciousness, right? The awareness. Because when I dream, there's no logic, time and space. It's not like the real world, right? And sometimes I cannot understand why some thoughts came to my mind, why they appear in my mind. So Freud started to think there's something more than the consciousness. And Freud was a scientist. So he will say, I describe things, I aggregate, right? I separate, I make relations among the descriptions. And science is like this, Freud, we will say. Hypotheses, descriptions, demonstrations about facts and ideas that everyone agreeing some undetermined point, right? So we apply these methods of description, aggregating, understand relations to the objects, and this is science. And Freud will say, I will do this with instinct. What is instinct if we apply a scientific method? And Freud starts to elaborate this notion. There's a stimulus, right? And inside of this notion, there's a kind of stimulus that are inside the subject. This is instinct. And the instinct is a kind of force that happens inside of us. And now the instinct shall have an end, an objective, an end. That is the satisfaction, right? And sometimes this do not happen. Sometimes you have something that is a barrier to the instinct, came from the unconsciousness to the consciousness, because of course we only know the unconsciousness in a consciousness state, right? So through a consciousness state, of course, that there is some access to the unconsciousness, like the dreams, right? But what Freud will say is, this stimulus that is inside the subject the origin of this stimulus is something outside the consciousness. And we have some kinds of instincts, right? One of them, of course, I will defend my life. So it's a survival instinct of the self, right? The individual. At the same time, just this individual, this subject, is an individual of the species, the human species, and the reproduction is an element of the human subject. So there's also sexual instincts, right? Of conservation of the species. And these sexual elements are related with the conservation of the subject, of the individual. Why an instinct do not achieve the end? There's something happening here, right? Because the end of instinct is the satisfaction. And when the satisfaction cannot be achieved, be by your own body, by the body of other, by some object, doesn't matter. This energy needs to go someplace. So what Freud started to do is say, look, our thoughts have roots that are not consciousness, are in the unconscious mind, right? Before Freud, we have Charcot saying that there is a second mind. But in Freud, the second mind is the unconsciousness, right? And the unconsciousness works with the principle of pleasure. So, more pleasure, less pain. More pain, less pleasure. The unconsciousness have this principle working in the individual. So when we start to think in the beginning of the modernity that the subject and the reason and the logic, it's enough to understand and know the world, with Freud and Nietzsche and Schopenhauer, our actions, our thoughts, better saying, our ideas, with roots that are not consciousness, or in other words, with roots that we cannot see, that we cannot understand in a first perspective. So the unconsciousness is bigger of the consciousness. And a lot of things happens here in the unconsciousness. Our instincts. And our instincts have an aim. That is the satisfaction of the instinct. The instinct wants to go to the consciousness, but many times there's a barrier. And when this happens, is when the disease appears. Repression. But of course, the same energy of the instinct that is inside us and is continuous, right? It's not an external instinct that came to our body and we give an answer and it's a moment. Like running from a tiger. It's different. The instinct, that is the stimulus in the inside of the subject, is continuous. So every day you have some energy inside you that guides you. And this is a broken point because we are guided by unconscious motives.